Hey you, come, gather around the campfire, and welcome to the party. This is Party Chat, a JRPG podcast where we talk about everything we love in the world of JRPGs and other Eastern titles. I am your host, Cameron Hawkins. Along, as always, is my party partner, Kevin Kenson. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing good today, and I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but I do just want to throw out real quick, happy birthday. Like
Yeah, my
the day this
birthday's on
goes live.
Thursday. Yeah, the day this goes live, it'll be my birthday. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's very kind of you. And for the first time in the history of our show for weekly episodes, we have a special guest. We have Aidan Moher with us. Aidan, how you doing?
I'm doing so good. Thank you for having me. Happy birthday. I did not know that before we started filming, so I'm happy to be here on your birthday and first guest. That's quite an honor.
No, yeah, it's like I appreciate you for like reaching out. I know that we've like engaged a little bit on Blue Sky, and then you just like hit me up like, hey, can I come on the podcast? And like we're a small podcast, you know what I mean? We're not there yet in the numbers, so just like the idea of the small number of people that listen on a weekly basis that someone reached out and was just like, and that's like in the space and like loves JRPGs. That was like, hey, like, can I come on? I feel very honored in that sense too. So,
Yeah, super
um,
freaking cool.
yeah, really appreciate it. For those that don't know you, Aiden, please pitch yourself. Tell us why you're the shit. All that good stuff.
Well, I'm a Hugo Award-winning like writer and editor. I used to be a book blogger many years ago with a book blog called A Dribble of Ink, and then I moved from that into games journalism. And I've been writing about video games, but specifically sort of retro gaming, RPGs, nostalgia, those sorts of topics for a number of years now. About 5 years ago, I broke in with a Kotaku piece called I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but the gist of it was like how there's like a generation of science fiction and fantasy writers who were as influenced by Ursula Le Guin and J.R. Tolkien. They were as influenced by people like Hironobu Sakaguchi, Yuji Horii, and the Japanese RPGs that they played as they were growing up. And so I connected with a lot of science fiction and fantasy writers to talk about the way games like, Suikoden or Dark Souls or, anything along the way has shaped the books that they're writing. And after that, I just kind of kept rolling and writing about video games. And I would go back to sort of my experience in that sort of 16-bit, 32-bit golden age playing these great RPGs and what that meant to me, how that shaped me. And eventually that led to a book deal with Running Press. And in 2022, I published Fight Magic Items, The History of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and the Rise of Japanese RPGs in the West. And that was a sort of all-encompassing look at exactly what it says on the tin, the history of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and kind of console RPGs, how they started in Japan, how they came over to the West, struggled for a while, then Final Fantasy VII hit, and then it was kind of skyward from there. That came out 2 years ago, and just today, as we're gonna release this, I just announced my second book, which is a title covering Suikoden I and II for Boss Fight Books, which is coming out next year.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Perfect timing
Yeah.
for that book too, with the remasters dropping. Is it tomorrow when this goes live?
No, also on my birthday.
Also,
Everything's on my birthday. Yeah. Yeah. That's how I knew. I'm like, oh yeah, it comes out on my birthday. So
I'm all messed
uh,
up because I pre-ordered it, but I know my physical's coming late, so I'm like, get here
Yeah.
sooner.
Uh, Definitely a coincidence that I'm announcing this on the release date of the remasters, but yeah, it's been a delight to kind of fall back into that fandom, and of course with the series sort of, we'll get into it, but sort of being revitalized by Konami. Surprisingly, it's been a fascinating time to be kind of immersed in the history and also the future of that series.
Absolutely.
yeah, awesome. Well, before we get into the news for this week, we're gonna go over some housekeeping. First and foremost, we have our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth spoiler cast now live on YouTube and podcast services. We did a 1 year later, as the anniversary of Rebirth was just over the weekend, and we thought it would be a perfect time to finally kind of break that game down and talk about the things that we love and don't love about that game. And yeah, I thought it was a really good conversation. And shout out to Kevin Diaz from PlayStation Source. He came on to talk about it. He's a big Final Fantasy VII guy. So, and we also are on Unlocking Kingdom Hearts together. So it just was kind of a no-brainer to ask him to come on and do that with us. And then on top of that, if you're listening to podcast audio specifically, I was on This Week in Gaming with Naomi Kyle this week, which you can listen to. It's a really short podcast, like maybe 30 minutes long, that you can listen to on your podcast service of choice. There's no video version, so yeah, that's cool. I was in high school when I watched Naomi Kyle do things at IGN, so it's kind of feel a little bit of a full circle moment there, which I've experienced a lot of since getting into this industry. And yeah, so outside of that, if you've been enjoying the show, take a minute to give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, subscribe on YouTube, all that jazz. It really helps with exposure. It really helps with getting our name out there. And yeah, you can also support us on Patreon financially if you care to do so, to get a bunch of different rewards depending on what tier you get. Getting the episode a day early, our monthly Q&A, which we just released our second monthly Q&A for February. Campfire Catalog, which is our book club podcast, which our first game is going to be on Chrono Trigger. That's going to come out sometime this month. Now that is March. So that's very exciting. And then lastly, go to youtube.com/Kevin Kenson and give Kevin a subscription. So subscribe to his channel so that we can get him to 1 million subscribers before the end of this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if someone wants to set me up with like a factor subscription or something, I'm not going to say no. Like that's an option too. Like, you know.
Okay. Yeah. Do that too. But now we're going to get into the news. I think obviously the biggest news that came out over the past week is the Pokemon Presents that happened last week, where we got some small update news, but then also, of course, some bigger stuff and some also unexpected announcements as well. I'm going to go through the quick bullet points first, just so we can eventually dig into the deep stuff at the end of this.
Sure.
So some quick bullet points. Pokemon Masters EX is getting 2 new Master Sync pairs with May and Kyogre and Brendan and Groudon. When I wrote this story for the thingy, I was like, who is Brendan? And then I looked it up, I'm like, oh, that's the male trainer's name. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I thought that was really funny.
Right.
Yeah. Pokemon Sleep is getting a Cresselia versus Darkrai event in March. Do either of y'all use Pokemon Sleep?
Not at all. And so I'm very curious what an event means. Like, do you just sleep with like different what's happening?
I don't know how that game works.
I
outside
don't
of
get
sleeping.
it. I feel like it would make me sleep less. Like the last thing I do when I want to go to sleep is play video games. So I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm confused by that one too.
I could definitely confirm Pocket's been messing up my sleep every now and then, because even though it has no impact on what I'm gonna pull, there's that part of me that's like, oh, if I stay up an extra hour, I can open a pack. I should do that.
I'm kind of the same way. It's like, oh, it's 10 o'clock. The reset has happened. Let me just open some cards really quick. Pokemon Cafe Remix is getting a new Apple-themed menu with Flapple and Appleton coming to the game. That's cool. I played Pokemon Cafe Remix when it first came out, and I'm like, it's a solid game. Like, not cool art style too. So
it's very cozy feeling. I remember I hopped in it too real quick when it first dropped, and like I didn't stick with it. It's rare for me to stick with that style of game, but like for that type of thing, I was like, oh, this is cool. This is neat.
Pokemon has like such range to be able to support those sort of things, and I love when they experiment outside of sort of the norms of what you might expect from Pokemon.
If there's one, this is a bit of a side tangent, but like I miss the days of them doing just a little more collaboration with like other IPs. Like we had the days of like Pokemon Conquest and like more of like such interesting weird collaborations that made, I thought, like awesome games. Like I enjoyed Pokken.
Mystery Dungeon, like the old Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games were awesome. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So more like focus points I want to dig into. Pokemon Concierge Season 2 is coming to Netflix in September. I have not watched Pokemon Concierge yet.
It's so cute.
I've heard it's really good.
Like
I've heard it's
the
great.
best Pokemon thing in years. It's so good.
It's
really
good.
Beautiful and funny and smart. It's like everything that Pokemon should be. It's so good.
I genuinely thought to myself, I was like, should I try and watch the season before we record tonight so I can talk about it and like give my opinion? But then like
Daredevil
I had to
happened.
watch Daredevil Born Again, so I was like, that's not gonna happen.
I definitely
But
recommend it. Like it's like the animation is fantastic, top notch, and like it's almost weird to me that it took this long to get something at least at this high profile that's like slice of life Pokemon. Like it's not
Yeah.
quite that. There is
Yeah.
a specific thing going on, but like it absolutely falls into that genre a little bit where it's
Yeah.
like we're not doing battles, we're not
Yeah.
chasing down mythical rare Pokemon. Like it's just
shows
with
people
Pokemon.
living life in that world, right? Like one of the episodes deals with sort of like social anxiety and Psyduck and stuff, and it's just such a like interesting way to look at Pokemon and how they might fit into other people's lives outside of like the combat aspect that dominates so much of
Yeah.
the game
You
and
know-
the movies and the other shows and stuff.
Star Wars Visions.
Mhm.
I want Pokemon Visions.
Oh,
I
yeah.
want like just
Yeah.
like, hey,
Yeah.
give a bunch of random studios, not
Oh, yeah.
random studios, obviously they're like notable studios. These animation studios just the keys to a Pokemon to do a Pokemon story and see what they come up with. Because like I'm not super crazy about like I like Star Wars, but I wouldn't consider myself a huge Star Wars fan. Um, but like and so like Star Wars Visions, I'm like, okay, one or two of these like I really enjoyed. The rest kind of just went over my head. But with Pokemon, I'm like, okay, now we're talking. Like, give me something. Like, I'm interested. Like, I'm so excited for the Ardman Pokemon project that they're working on. That's like not supposed to come out for like another 2 years or something. But
Yeah, it's been a while.
I love that studio so much. So
And their Visions
I'm really
episode
excited.
was fun too.
Yeah, exactly.
Weird Pokemon stuff works so good too. Like Detective Pokemon, or sorry,
Is there
Detective
like a
Pikachu
Pikachu? Yeah.
was bizarre and it shouldn't have worked, but it was so good. And I revisit it like with my kids, and they love it, and I love it, and it's like it shouldn't work, but Pokemon just has that sort of like foundation where they can tell any sort of story on top of it. And a Vision style project would be perfect for Pokemon, and let them
I'm
explore the range of stories that you can tell in Pokemon, not necessarily solely focused on like that core audience of whatever 8 to 12 year olds that they seem to like kind of target with a lot of the shows.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. I am surprised that it's like we still haven't gotten another live action Pokemon movie.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's taken this long. Uh, just considering that Pokemon is like the biggest IP in the world.
Yeah.
But we're getting
Pikachu was
a second one.
So
Yeah, we're getting another one. So, next up is probably the thing that no one expected, and also, Pokemon Company, y'all did me dirty with this because they start this trailer with two kids playing on their Game Boy Advance or their Game Boy Colors or Game Boys, and I'm just like, oh my god, the rumor of like the 3 gens is happening. This is it. This is it. And it wasn't. And instead, it's a new game called Pokemon Champions. It's going to be on the Switch. It's going to be a mobile game, and it's supposed to be some type of game that kind of has aspects of like Pokemon Stadium and also Pokemon Battle Revolution, where like you're supposed to be able to take your Pokemon out of Pokemon Home and then you can battle people. But I'm also just like, but we have that in Scarlet and Violet, or like in the most recent Pokemon games, like you can already do that. So that's like the one thing about this game that I'm just like, what is the real purpose behind something like this? Do you feel the same, Kevin, or am I?
I'm not sure if I have the best like room to comment on this one, just because as much as I do enjoy Pokemon and I've kept up with it, I've never really been like focused on multiplayer aspects outside of trading. So when it comes to like, oh, we're releasing like a stadium style focused additional game, my brain's just like, cool. I'm probably not actually checking that out myself. And so I'm not the best choice for this one.
So do you know like what Battle Revolution was?
No.
So Battle Revolution was a Wii game,
Mhm.
and it was basically a way for you to battle with your DS game's Pokemon in 3D.
Right, like Stadium would
That's
allow you to bring
that's
over like your red blue characters and such. Yeah.
yes, kind of. But like this was more. This was a lot less had a lot less features than like a Pokemon Stadium, because Pokemon Stadium you could still, they had pre-made Pokemon you could battle with. They had like the mini games. Like Battle Revolution was kind of like that was kind of like almost the whole point of getting Battle Revolution. Aiden, are you familiar with this at all, or?
I'm very similar to Kevin. Like I very familiar with Pokemon, play a lot, but I do not engage really with the competitive stuff.
Mhm.
And so when these things come up, I also sort of just
You check out.
okay, like
Plays a
they're
little
there.
bit,
It's
yeah.
it's fine. People who like that like that. This announcement strikes me. There's always been the like oft rumored like MMO, right? Pokemon MMO. And I kind
Oh,
of
man.
wonder if that was sort of around for a while and they might have just tried to kind of like cut their losses, put something out there that's sort of battle focused, and
Yeah.
it might sort of be the remnants of maybe an in development MMO or
Mhm.
more full featured online experience, which, I might be a little more interested in. But at the same time, I also just like Pokemon on the go. Like, I like playing it on a handheld. I'd rather, like, for me personally, at this point, I'd go back to the DS ones or the GBA ones and
Same.
play it on my pocket. And it's still sort of that single player with asynchronous, like, multiplayer stuff. So, you know, just doing combat focused stuff isn't really appealing to me at this stage. And I don't really know what this means for the series going forward. If this is supposed to replace like a more multiplayer focused title or not. But like you said too, the mainline games are integrating a lot of that stuff, and it sort of exists in Scarlet and Violet right now, to a degree. And so, where's the line between what each game is kind of serving up, rather
Yeah.
than trying to build just like a complete experience that hits on a lot of those notes. But
Yeah, I agree completely. Some other news. Pokemon TCG Pocket has a new booster set called Triumphant Light that focuses on Arceus. I always when I was a
It,
kid it was Arceus, and I still hate that I have to say Arceus now. I hate the change. But it is what it is. Yeah, so that's already out now. I've been pulling packs, and I'm already like over halfway done with the set at this point, but it's like kind of one of the mini sets, kind
yeah.
of like Mythical Island or Mythical Island if you if you're familiar with Pocket and you've been playing it. So it's like only 75 cards in the set, so it's a lot easier to. I mean, funny enough, that's actually the one where I still need to kind of go back to, because you get like certain emblems, and you get the Celebi emblem if you pull the Celebi EX and the Mew EX from that set, and I haven't pulled the immersive Celebi
Mhm.
EX yet. And so I'm kind of frustrated that I'm like, oh, I just want that emblem. That's all I want. I don't even care about the rest of the cards because I think I completed the set. Like I have like
The main
one of
one.
the rarities. You know what I mean? So, but it is what it is. Pokemon Unite is getting Suicune, Alolan Raichu, and Alcremie for new Pokemon you can play as. I actually really like Pokemon Unite. Pokemon Unite was the game that like made me not get into, like I'm not into them, but like I it was the MOBA that I was just like, okay, I can play this. I
Yeah.
understand this. It's very approachable. It's not too like confusing, and I can play as my girl Lapras, so I'm super happy about that. Um, and it's a fun game. I don't. It's not a game that I can like keep up to date with in a real way, but like I'll have some spurts where I'm like, yo, I want to play some Pokemon Unite, and I hit up my friend Ken Shepard. I'm like, yo, you want to play some Pokemon Unite? And yeah, it's a really fun game that continues to update and innovate, and it's great. Aiden, have you played Pokemon Unite at all, or like, are you just really just like the single player Pokemon
these days,
guy?
I'm mostly just single player Pokemon stuff. Like I said, Mystery Dungeon, like the older like side stuff, I was definitely enjoyed. These days, there's just too much going on, and so I have to
Yeah,
kind of pick and
100%,
choose, right?
100%.
Yeah.
MOBAs are something also that I've sort of like dabbled in here and there, but haven't really ever connected with. But I've always loved the idea of Pokemon as a MOBA because the combat, like the not system in terms of game systems, but the idea behind like Pokemon combat in the world is just so perfectly aligned with what MOBAs want to do. So it's something that has always kind of tickled the back of my head, and I also love how arbitrary and random like new Pokemon additions are to these
Hmm.
games. Like, how do they settle on those three Pokemon to add to the game?
That that's very true. That's
But
very true. Like Unite will just like announce a random Pokemon. It's like it really feels like that they just like have all the Pokemon in like a lottery box, and you just pull out a name like, all right, this is the one.
What
Yeah.
you mean?
Yeah,
You mean
exactly.
like there's not a significant enough Greedent fan base for that to have been like a lead choice, you know? Like
Exactly, exactly. Uh, and yeah, and lastly, the big
the
thing,
big
Pokemon
thing.
Legends ZA was finally been revealed, and I'm gonna go over what we saw in the trailer and what we know, but I also want to dig into a deeper, like, kind of just how I've seen the fandom and just like people react to this game, that I think is really interesting. So first off, the starters. My boy is back, everybody. The goat has returned. Totodile is back. We got Totodile, we got Chikorita, and we got Tepig. Uh, Super happy about this. Obviously, as someone who is I stand Totodile. And when they announced this, I think I'm cooking here. So let me cook for a sec. So when this was announced, people were just like, "Oh man, like they chose two Johto starters? That's so weird." Blah 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 blah. And at first, I was just like, "Oh, this is just a consolation prize." Where they're just like, because I think you can agree with me, Aiden, on this one. Like, for some reason, despite being the best region and the best generation of Pokemon, the Pokemon Company hates Johto. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. They hate Johto representation.
Yeah, it's just intimidation. They
Well,
don't want
I
to.
also know part of this is coming from your. I'm on this boat as well of just like, so we're getting Let's Go Pichu and Togepi, right? Like someday that's happening. It's not.
Why didn't we though? Like, why not? But no, I genuinely, like, I know that I'm biased. Like, say you can be like, oh, Cameron's just biased because he loves Johto. Pokemon Crystal's his second favorite game of all time. That's fine. But what I'm saying is, like, we do not get the Johto love that we deserve. Like, I bet that if we went to like look at the roster of Pokemon Unite, maybe two or three are Johto Pokemon.
I
Like,
actually have
there's
it up right
not
now.
many.
I'm gonna look.
Yeah, look it up. Look it up right now. There's not that many. Suicune is like the first one that I'm
Yeah,
like that. Yeah. So I
speaking
don't
right
know.
away. Ho Oh.
Okay.
Let's see. Umbreon. Okay,
Okay.
we're at 3.
Okay.
Uh,
I think Espeon's in there too.
Probably. I'm just going in whatever order they have it listed on here. Um, I need to scroll faster. Scissor, Espeon,
Scissor. I said Caesar,
and
but
hmm?
Caesar.
Caesar. Oh, whatever. Uh, is this supposed to be scissor like scissors though?
No, it's Caesar.
Huh. Never heard it pronounced out loud before.
Huh.
Uh,
I do wonder if part of the gold silver erasure is that period of the show is very strange. Like
It's great though. I love
I like it,
Johto.
but it's unusual because they made the first season of the show and it was so big they didn't really know, and they weren't really expecting it to be as big and successful as it
Sure.
was. And then so they did the Orange Island stuff. Ho-Oh was already in the first season, sort of as like stealth promotion for Gold and Silver. And so like that period of the show is just strange. And I wonder if they're sort of like if that influences the way that they treat its placement in the overall like Pokemon pantheon. It's not as like strongly defined for a lot of people. And I'm like looking at this through like my kids' eyes, right? Like they weren't around when Gold and Silver came out. It's Gold and Silver and Crystal especially are like for my money the compared like contextually for when they were released, those are the best Pokemon games. Compared to like the time, the time they were released. There's other ones that have brought in better, new features or
Cause like,
whatever. The Game
yeah.
Boy or the GBA remakes of like Green and Red were really good, but like the way Gold and Silver leveled up the first games is just so good. But the show and the Pokemon stuff around the games was scrambling to keep up with the success. And I wonder if that's part of why there's a little bit of hesitancy around the Johto stuff.
yeah.
I feel like that is totally valid and very possible. I also feel like that they recognize how beloved Johto is and they
Yeah.
don't want to screw things up.
Yeah. That
Like, that's like,
intimidation factor, like of trying to
yeah,
go back to what people love so much. Yeah.
yeah. Which, because like I remember, I don't know about you Aiden or you Kevin, but for me, when I was in high school, there were only two games throughout the 4 years that I was in high school where like a game coming out felt like an event in the sense of like everyone was talking about it at school. Like, because I was in high school, everyone was talking about like it at school. Everyone was talking about it. Like you would see people playing the game like in between classes, like, and that was Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Modern Warfare 3. Like those were like the two games. And so like I still like I think like the closest maybe that I felt that way with a Pokemon game or like experienced something like that was like when X and Y came out. Like a lot of people were super stoked about X and Y. But yeah, I just like there's it just felt like an event when the Johto remakes came out in a way that like the Kanto remakes didn't, or like fourth gen Pokemon didn't at the time. Like
So
I don't know.
you know what's messed up though, because I was
Mm.
like, oh, I wonder like how much sales plays a role in this. So I wanted to look at like what the kind of like lifetime sales have been of each game. Um, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl beat Heart Gold Soul Silver by like 2 million,
Mm.
and a large part of that is because the Switch audience is so large, right? There's just way
Yes.
more people on the Switch.
Yes.
Like that's part of why Sword and Shield was such a huge success because like it was the first Pokemon game on the Switch, or at least first,
Yeah.
mainline because we had Let's Go, which was a little different. Um, yeah, Heart Gold Soul Silver, as much as I love it, my personal favorite of the series. Not that high ranking in terms of raw sales.
I mean, some of the best games ever
Oh
haven't
yeah,
sold super well. So you know
yeah,
what I mean?
no, for
Like
sure. I'm just saying, like, I do wonder. Original Gold Silver ranks pretty high. It's the third most selling of all time because it was also riding off to the whole like red, blue, yellow like momentum. But I do wonder if like subpar sales of remake may have like informed like, maybe
mm,
they're not here as much. I don't know. I'm reaching here.
mm, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But as I'm back to cooking. Maybe it's actually the exact opposite. Where? No, hear me out. Hear me out.
The cope.
No, hear me out. The next Legends game is going to be in Johto because they don't bring starters of the same region into the Legends games. So they're doing Totodile and Chikorita now because they want to do Johto next, and they didn't want there to be like a long prolonged gap in like one of those starters being in another Legends game or something like that. I think I'm cooking with something there. I think there's some gas there.
I would love for you to be correct, is how I'm going to word my response to that.
But come on, you can't not say that doesn't make sense.
I agree that like double downing on Johto starters is weird to me because my brain wants pattern recognition, and I'm like, no, like for the last game it was one each from a different gen. Why this time are we and like sure, like that is a thing that sounds like it could be a thing. I don't know how much I want to actually believe that. Like I want that to be real. I just don't. I'm gonna let you cook. I'm gonna let you cook.
Aiden, do you think
I'm
I'm
far
cooking?
more inclined to believe in a Johto Let's Go than I am the starter theory. But who knows?
Like
Maybe.
as someone who was a Johto stan, like I would love that we got Chikorita and we got Totodile in this game, and then we're getting Let's Go with well, it'll be one of the other it won't actually technically be one of the starters in those games technically, but you would be able to catch them eventually.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm just saying that like it makes sense. It makes sense, and like Johto Legends like would be so cool.
Okay, let's go
would-
Johto Legends. Each of the Legends games sort of has a gimmick, right? Like the first one was time travel back into like the far past. Now we've got a fully urban environment. What are you looking at for Johto? How would a Johto Legends game look to you?
Oh man, I don't know
What's
what
special about that region?
I really don't know what it would look like, but like I mean Celebi is like the time traveling Pokemon, so I'm wondering if there would be like time traveling
doubt
elements where like each region is like a different point in
that's
time
cool.
in
That's sick.
Johto.
That
Yeah.
would be neat.
What if it's just like it's a Johto Legends game, but it's
I'm
just
cooking. This
set
is
in
me cooking.
the
This
gold
is
and
me.
silver post game?
Wait, what? Sorry.
Johto, it's a Johto Legends game, but it's just set in the gold and silver post game in Kanto.
You just make it
Region.
you make it like a true open world approach to like exploring the Johto Kanto region combo, right? Like that would be. Look,
That
I
would
think
also
we're
be
all
cool.
describing things we would love to play, which is sadly not how this always works.
But I was just saying that like I think that Totodile and Chikorita is a potential reasonable sign that we might get Johto Legends next. So that because we're not going to get Johto starters in a Johto Legends
Right.
game. That's all I wanted to say. It takes Pokemon Legends ZA takes place in the future. You see the old guy, I forgot his name, that is in X and Y, who is like thousands of years old at this point, and he's back, and he's taller for some reason.
Yeah,
He's
AZ,
very
by the
tall.
way.
He got
Yeah.
them long legs.
Yeah, AZ is who you're thinking of.
And who is it?
AZ.
AZ.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's
Of
supposed to be
course.
Az or AZ. They're both capitalized, but
I think it's AZ. I think
Yeah.
it's AZ. And it takes place, as we already know, in Lumio City, and there's like apparently the city has like set up these different zones where like wild Pokemon can just roam free, I guess. But then you can still run into other Pokemon seemingly in the city. Like we saw some gameplay of like the garb border of the garbage Pokemon, like them fighting in the on the like in an alley. It's just like, okay, cool. It is really interesting to think about how this game is just going to be laid out with it all taking place in a giant city.
Yeah.
Like I just kind of like, what does that look like? And because I think that the attractiveness of Arceus Legends was they were basically Breath of the Wilding Pokemon, which is something that like people wanted. It was like one of those rare times where like, oh my god, the Pokemon company's giving us what we want. Like, and now it's just like, okay, this seems interesting. This seems different. I don't know how I really feel about this. Do y'all have any like thoughts on that?
Urban environment's cool. There's always so many questions about how the Pokemon world works. So I always like seeing new aspects or new peaks at like, this is sort of what things function like in a Pokemon world. I do worry that it's not going to provide the kind of breadth of environment that a lot of the Pokemon games have thrived off in the past, like even the first Legends game, because it has this urban environment. But, they could surprise us, obviously. And like breaking it down into these like wild zones is fun and gives you an opportunity to have, the snow biome, I guess.
Yeah.
The water biome or whatever, however they break it up. Mix and match them a little bit more than that because Pokemon usually kind of mixes and matches. Yeah, I mean it looks like Pokemon Automata. Like it looks like Near Automata. Like I love overgrown urban environments. That's always my jam. I like that. I don't like that it just still looks like a 3DS game. Like the environments are just so like bland and doesn't really sell what I really love about the Pokemon world. But I'm curious. I like Pokemon when it experiments, and I like these spin-off games that allow them to reach new areas and try new things in Pokemon before bringing them into the mainline series.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like I'm a lot of the same mind as you, Aiden, on this. I am excited a little bit by the idea of an urban focused thing because I actually have always thought that that's been underexplored in a lot of RPGs because it's always like, oh man, like you're gonna go to the big central city in this place, and it's like cool. There's 5 screens. It's bigger than like a small town, but whatever. It's always like I've always thought there's potential in this idea of doing an RPG where you really focus on like a true big cityscape, and that's you're going to every nook and cranny of it, and you're really getting to know like the town. I don't know how well this is going to deliver on that fantasy for me, but I've always thought it's something that's been underutilized in the genre. So I actually am excited about that aspect of it. Same deal visually. It's like I'm not that surprised, but at the same time, I would just love that to not be the case.
Especially because this is presumably also going to come out on Switch 2, right? Like they must be working on a Switch 2 version. It's
I think what we saw was the Switch 2 version.
With that frame rate, I hope not.
But it's still like a 3D Pokemon, so who knows? But
so okay, like this is the thing that I wanted to like get into. Is that like I see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, this game doesn't look good," and I feel like I don't. And to be fair, I'm someone who like doesn't care about frame rate.
Yeah.
If it runs well, like then that's cool.
I care about stable frame rate. I don't care about high frame rate. I just want to stay.
Yeah, and so like, but even then with like frame rate, sometimes I still don't even notice. I'm just like, oh, like when you brought that up, I'm like, I don't know what part of the trailer that you're talking about.
Right.
I don't. And so it's just like, I saw a lot of people just being like, oh, this game does not look good. And I'm like, this looks way better than Scarlet and Violet. What are you talking about? Like with the game that was like just so bad, like with the performance, like this looks night and day better. I'm not saying it looks amazing, but just like from the sense of like compared to the past couple of games like Arceus Legends and Scarvi, it's way better. I don't know. I don't know. Like
Yeah, I don't know. I would need to see them side by side again, maybe, because that definitely wasn't my reaction. Was, oh, this looks better than, like, well, definitely better than Scarlet Violet, because that's just its own tier of problems.
Yeah.
They did say they were gonna fix it. I'm waiting on that patch. But like even Arceus, like I feel
Arceus is not. No, it's bad, dude. It's bad.
it's better than Scarlet Violet.
Everything looks grainy. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
everything
Just
looks grainy.
repeating textures and stuff. I think one of the things that like is a challenge in the new one is that urban environments are gray and boxy and right angles and straight lines, and so you need a lot of detail to kind of separate and create character within these environments. And so when I see these environments and it's just a bunch of buildings that look the same with sort of scattered set decoration around it, it just doesn't feel as vibrant as what I can, even if you go back to like Arceus, I can at least imagine that natural landscape with its hills and its trees and stuff in the distance as feeling a little more alive than what the graphics were giving me. There's still some of that abstraction where it's happening in my head as much as it's happening on the screen. When I get into an urban environment and like sight lines are cut off by big tall buildings and all you're seeing are a lot of gray walls, it really starts to fall apart at the details. And that's really what stood out to me about that trailer for the new one, is that it just doesn't really seem to have the density of detail and personality that I want from something that's in like an urban environment. Especially like, again, going back to like Nier Automata, which was set in an urban environment. It's very gray, it's very taupe, but it's so like detail packed that the place still feels alive even though it's like a dead city.
Yeah.
And that can be such a challenge in urban environments. I think that's why you see games like Horizon do what they did. Enslaved. Do you guys remember Enslaved from the Xbox 360
I've heard of
days?
Enslaved, yeah.
So like another one where you've seen like sort of natural environments throughout an urban city. I think that you can really spruce things up, and we'll see. Like maybe we get more trailers in this, and maybe those urban environments make up a far larger portion of the screen, like the wild areas, or sorry, far larger portion of the game, and that provides that sort of depth of detail and personality that I'm looking for. The character models and the Pokemon models and stuff, like all of that has always looked good, even through some of the more recent games.
Mhm.
And if we can get an experience where they feel sort of not a tier above the environments, I think we'd be in a good place for Pokemon. But
Yeah, so something where it feels almost a little less mismatched, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
this looks
yeah,
great, and then the surrounding is
yeah.
not. Yeah.
And like I wish they'd go like just do like a cell shaded or stylized graphic style for the world. And I think that really like there's that uncanny valley for me. The characters are cartoony and like an anime style and look really great, and then they just have these sort of like environments that are just polygonal textured environments that just don't match up. And I think they could kind of get away with doing a stylized environment that feels closer to the characters and still doesn't require them to push a lot of horsepower. Like it's not really a horsepower thing. It's just sort of a mismatch in art style, I feel is the real big flaw with the latest games. I'm a big Sword and Shield fan. I still think it looks really good. And I think it did some more of, like trying to match up the characters with the environments and a bit more cartoony. The fixed camera angle helped a lot, obviously, but I wish they could kind of figure out what worked in the high best parts of that game and transfer it over to these newer games.
I liked Sword and Shield way more than I thought I would.
Yeah.
Like I still think that it gets complicated where like, oh, I really don't like Unova as a generation, but I think Black and White 2 is one of the best Pokemon games ever made, like
100%.
easy.
Yeah.
100%.
But that was the first Pokemon game in a while where I was just like, damn, they did like a solid job here. Like I had a good time with this. Despite, the issues that I did have with it. And so and when you were bringing up the character models, that actually made me want to ask y'all, like, what are the feelings on the trainer models, like the trainer designs? Because I've seen some people that like really don't like it. I think it looks great. I like the fedora aside. Like the fedora, say what you will about the fedora. But I really like the trainer design, and I think it's probably like my favorite trainer design like since Black and White 2 probably. Like I think they're dripped out a bit, you know?
I like them. I like that they're a little goofy. I like the hats. Like they're why not, right? Like go like give a little bit of that personality and a little bit of like just definition to the area of the world that they're in. Like let them wear silly hats. Like I didn't really care for the Scarlet and Violet main characters and like the school outfit
No.
and the like clothing choices in that game. Like in Sword and Shield I loved going and buying new clothes and like kitting out my my character and changing their outfit all the time. Scarlet and Violet I just didn't care because I just was not inspired by the school uniforms. Whereas this one I feel like we're back to being like, okay, yeah, like, would I dress that way? No, but it feels sort of, like a style that would exist in a city that, I don't live in, and that's okay too, even if it could be a little goofy.
Yeah, and I'm willing to bet we could buy different hats because I agree the hat is the only part that I'm not really like a big fan of, and I'm sure you can buy different hats. Like I think that's the easiest accessory to swap out if you're gonna give them
Yeah.
the characters.
Yeah. There's like one designer on the team that was like, I knew we shouldn't have gone with the fedora. I told you guys we should have gone for with the bowler cap or whatever, or the flat cap. That's just like watching all these reactions, just trying to
But
tell everybody they were right.
but it's given reactions. People are talking.
100%. Yeah, we're talking about it right now, right?
Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit, but there is a kind of new battle style where you can kind of run around, your Pokemon follows you. It's probably like the closest it's been to like the anime in a sense.
Mm.
And that looks cool.
It does look
I
weird.
like how
Like
they're kind
positioning
of
matters more. Like this area of effect attacks and stuff like that now. Range on attacks,
Yeah.
kind of neat. Yeah,
yeah,
I
and
don't know if that'll
I'm
translate to the real like the next mainline game very well, but I like that they're trying it. It makes me think of Unite. Like it makes me think of a MOBA in a way.
Yeah, and this one's also completely like more real time, right? Because it's actually
Yeah,
cooldown based for using abilities
yeah.
instead of like, because like, uh, Arceus messed around a little bit with changing how the combat paradigm worked, but it was really just a like, do you want to change move priority speed?
Hmm.
Whereas this is
yeah.
like, no, we are changing to an actual real time, or at least pseudo
Hmm.
real time system where it's maybe the little MMO tab target style where
Yeah,
you're waiting for the moves to the right
yeah.
button to light up. I've seen a lot of people compare it to Xenoblade, which I think is a fair
Oh yeah,
like at least
yeah.
eyesight reaction, right? Like seeing that
Hmm.
UI. I think Xenoblade brings a little more extra on top of like just hitting buttons when they light up, and I'm hoping we'll see
Too
something.
much extra,
Yeah,
but
possibly too much extra depending on the specific game. Cam's a big two fan, so
yeah, yeah.
um,
Uh,
but yeah, I'm very curious to see more of that combat system action because I feel like we just got the
mhm.
littlest snippet of how it is going to be different. Um, but I really want to see a lot more like the nuances of that approach because I feel like depending on how it's filled out and what they do with it, it could either be like, yes, thank you, this is the direction I want Pokemon combat to go, or it's going to be like, cool, I pressed X every time it lit up and I won my battles and great, you know.
I'm a little like it reminds me a little bit of the first Nino Kuni's combat, which I didn't really
Yeah.
care for.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
yeah, I didn't really like it very much. So I'm a little concerned too. But the comparison to the like making it more like the anime, like it does sort of seem like it plays out more like how combat in the anime plays out, which I think is neat. And if they can nail that, or at least if they can lay a blueprint that then allows them to build off of it and move towards something that's a little more real time like that. That's not just like rotating through your cooldowns. Like I don't want to play Final Fantasy 16 where you're just like rotating through your cooldowns and every
Right.
battle's the same. Like if they can figure out a way to find the balance of like, timing for when you need to use different moves, and that Pokemon balance within like a real time system, I could see that being interesting going forward for sure.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be something that we'll see in the mainline series, but I think
Hmm.
that like it'll be something that we'll see over time in the like
Yeah.
Legends games.
Yeah, if Legends kind of becomes its own pillar that just repeatedly gets stuff, which I will say in general, I'm more excited about like I'm more excited to see this game launch and then whatever comes after if they keep going with it, than I am for like Gen 10. Like I'll be excited for new Pokemon,
100%.
but
Yeah.
like the game itself, look, I'm probably gonna pick it up. I'm probably gonna play it. I'm part of the problem, but uh, like I am definitely more excited for the experimentation we're seeing going on here. Like win
Yeah.
or lose, like succeed or
Yeah.
I
fail. I'm glad to see
Yeah.
them trying things here.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
agree. Next story. there was a Suikoden showcase of sorts a few days ago, and we got a few news snippets. We got a new Suikoden mobile game that is also getting like an anime adaptation as well.
Manga adaptation.
Manga adaptation. Thank you. And then what are you guys feelings about this as the Suikoden guys?
Aiden, would you like to go first on this one as our honored guest?
Sure. When they announced this like live stream or this promotional stream on the the heels of or just in advance of the remasters coming out, I didn't really expect too much. Suikoden's more or less been dead for over a decade until these remasters. I wasn't really expecting a new game. I definitely wasn't expecting a new game set in the canon universe, like set between Suikoden 5 and the first game. Uh, but if you had told me beforehand that they were going to announce something that looked beautiful, like a pixel art HD 2D style Suikoden game, it's going to be set in the mainline world, 108 characters, it's going to have all that, but it's going to be a mobile game, I probably would have believed you as well. And I think we're seeing Konami recognizing that there's a market for these retro revival style RPGs, right? We're seeing more of them with the Octopath Traveler games, with Dragon Quest 3, with what Square Enix is doing, but even then with like Ayuden Chronicle, that big Kickstarter they did. And so they want to get back in there and they see this opportunity for Suikoden, and I think they're right to do that. But you can tell they're also sort of tiptoeing in a little bit. And so, I've played a fair bit of the Suikoden remaster at this point. We can talk about that later, and it's pretty good. Like it feels like they're taking the series seriously, but I think that this set of announcements, there was no English stream, and I think that is pretty indicative of who these announcements are really for. The new mobile game they have announced for the West, from what I understand at this point. It'll come out here, but this was a set of announcements for Japanese fans. And from what I was reading online, like on Blue Sky, Japanese audience seems pretty excited about this. The response there is like, "Hey, sweet, new Suikoden game, like new manga, new anime adaptations, like Suikoden's back. What's happening? This is great." Whereas I think here, in North America, we're a little bit more like, like really, like a mobile game, like that's what you're giving us after all this time.
Yeah.
If you had showed me those screenshots though and said, "Hey, new Suikoden coming," and didn't tell me it was mobile, I would be through like to the moon. I'd be through the roof, like with excitement because it's beautiful. And so, can they build a great mobile game that, they've announced that there's gotcha elements, they've announced that there's events, the stuff that I don't want in my games, but can they do something similar to what Mist Walker did with what's it called? Fantasian.
Yeah.
And create a mobile game that satisfies as a standalone, like full RPG experience. Like maybe, hopefully. And then if they, like have stuff on top of that and you can through events or gotcha, you get like old heroes from the old games and they get spirited into this world and you can use them on your, your team or in your army battles or whatever. And that's sort of where the gotcha stuff is on top of a great RPG experience. Great. Me personally, as a longtime Suikoden fan, I want every excuse to put my phone down, not pick it up more. So I'm a little like bearish on it in that regard. But at the same time, if this is what Konami needs to like baby step into reviving Suikoden properly, because I think there's a huge field, like a field and opportunity for it, as we see with like the Trails games. They're big. They're getting remakes of the first game that looks amazing, and I think that the same audience that loves Trails games could really be into Suikoden, and it provides such a good blueprint of what like a multifaceted, like multi-game narrative with this politically based, like intricate storytelling could look like in 2025. And so I think that opportunity and the time is right. I just hope that Konami is going to sort of like recognize that it needs more than just sort of this mobile game announcement. And I hope the series doesn't get tanked if the mobile game doesn't pick up or isn't as good as it needs to be. That said, it's got some pretty good staff on it. Like this isn't just a B project. This is a serious project. It's just not made for a Western audience. It's made for a Japanese audience.
Yeah. Also coming from being a Suikoden fan, like I agree with a lot of what was said there. I think when it comes to the mobile game aspect, there absolutely is that tendency in the West to have like mobile's a dirty word almost, right? Like you just have this like just chill up your spine the moment you're like, oh, it's a mobile game, and especially when it's a mobile gotcha game, right? Like gotcha is just alarm bells for a lot of people, and I get it like completely. I don't think it is a genre that is like devoid of the chance to be good. Like I absolutely think that it can be done right. It's just difficult. There's a lot of very easy pitfalls to fall into and habits to follow. And I mean, you see this all the time. I mean, like Square Enix has done how many different mobile gacha adaptations of IPs that they did not stick around and support in the long run, right? Like Mana had one that was like less than a year. Um, and so like as someone who's an RPG fan, like I've seen a lot of IPs I love get the gacha mobile treatment, and it is not pulled off well. Like it didn't happen in the West, but like Breath of Fire 6, literally called 6, it was a mobile game. That was a gacha title.
Yeah.
And so
And
I absolutely have that hesitation as well hearing that. It's one of those like I want to hope for the best, like I do, but there is that part of me that needs to also prepare for like they might not do this right. Especially because like what I find really interesting about them making this mobile gotcha game is, as Aiden pointed out, it's in like main canon timeline. This isn't like some weird meta like, oh, we're in this other world and we can summon heroes from this place and we're bringing all these like characters together. Like, no, this is happening in universe in a specific part of the setting that's been talked about before.
there's like screenshots of Gregminster, which is like the main city
Yeah,
from the first game. Yeah, like in this remake or this new game. So it's like it's a real Suikoden game.
yeah.
It's
They're
just on
adding
mobile and it's a gotcha game.
exactly, yeah. And so it's
Yeah.
like handling, expanding the universe that way, right? With like a mobile title. And it's interesting you brought up the parallels to Trails. Maybe we can get into this a little later when we talk about your work with the upcoming book. Because I hadn't really thought about that before in terms of like, yeah, actually, like Suikoden is a overarching shared world. More so for the first three. I think once
Yeah, we can talk about
Moriyama
that
left,
too.
they
Yeah.
were like
Yeah.
they kept it in setting, but then they abandoned the very clear plot line that was being built up across the first three. Um, yeah,
In
it's
fact, this one is also set before one is really interesting to me because it still tells me they're still afraid to like progress that forward,
yes,
like that story
100%.
forward chronologically.
Absolutely, yeah. Cam, for your knowledge on this, real quick, 1, 2, and 3 happen in like timeline order, and then 4 is like, never mind, we're going back in time, like super far back,
Yeah.
and then 5 is right before 1. Like they just didn't want to advance the overarching storyline. Like they just didn't want to touch it at that point. It
Mm.
seems like, at least. And then later games were all new universe spin-off style stuff. Yeah, so that and that's the thing too, is that like there's that other part of me that goes, well, if this is what it takes to fund doing all the cool stuff, right? Like at the end
Yeah.
of the day, like we're gonna talk about Monster Hunter sales for a bit, and part of like my excitement for that is how Capcom takes that success and plugs that into other projects.
Yeah.
And that would be my hope for this, right? Is like
Yeah.
even if even if I'm going to be pessimistic about what the game itself could be, if it's successful, that's where maybe we get a proper new mainline entry. Maybe that's where we get remasters or remakes of 3, 4, and 5. There's a lot of potential of what can be done with this franchise, and there's that worry of like, can it be brought back right in a sense?
Yeah.
But I
It's
also really want to see them try.
it feels to me almost like there's somebody inside Konami who's been like banging down the door to make a Suikoden game forever.
Yeah.
And then finally they're like, and their bosses are like, no, like we're not going to revive this old IP. And then finally the guy's like, okay, we'll make it a gotcha game on phones. Those make money. Let me make a Suikoden game. Trying to Trojan horse into reviving the series, and hopefully it works out that way. Like that would be ideal. What does the future of the series look like without Murayama here to kind of guide it? Because the mainline games did sort of detour,
Oh yeah.
right? As soon as he left Konami, and can they sort of forge that path forward? What would even take to get to Suikoden 6? And I think,
Sure.
I mean, we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But the path forward is not obvious for this series. The remasters, I think there's a lot of excitement. It seems like they're going to do pretty well. But there's still like a pretty arduous uphill battle before we could get like Suikoden 6, like the next like continuation of the story that was left off 20 years ago
Oh,
when Suikoden 3
absolutely. That is, yeah,
concluded.
that is a very specific future where the mobile game is very successful. The remasters sell like bonkers. They remake or
Yeah,
remaster other games, and those sell like
yeah,
hotcakes. And like,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that's definitely a very specific narrow future, but one that I
Suikoden 3 is like so hard to play. Like I love Suikoden 3.
same.
It's one of my it's one of my pets, but it's so hard to go back
Yes.
to that I don't think you could remaster it. Like it
No,
would need
it needs
so
fixing.
much work to work for like a modern audience in 2025. So like that complicates things too.
Yeah. No, that would
That
need a
like
remake. I
they
agree.
couldn't just put out an HD version of 3 like and I expect people to put up with like a lot of its bullshit. You could do that with 5.
Oh yeah,
5 would be great. Like 5 would, reduce the load times, improve the performance, put it out as an HD version, and it would be awesome. But like 3 just couldn't do that. And so like do we is the remaster in this gotcha game going to be successful enough that they're going to remake 3? Like I don't know. But
yeah,
if Trails in the Sky can get a full-on big 3D remake, like maybe that audience is there, right?
sure. But that's also comes down ultimately to what Konami wants at the end of this, right? Like I think this
Yeah.
is something Cam's talked
That's a
about a lot with
Konami
Trails is
thing.
like I think Trails there's a expectation of what Trails is ultimately going to do.
Yes.
Like they know
Yeah.
it's a niche audience and they tap into that a
Yes.
little bit by like reusing assets and that kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
like the Yakuza approach a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
And
does
that's
Konami
okay.
have that mindset here? You know?
Yeah, and that's what Suikoden should be, right? It should aim to sell 600,000 copies,
Yeah,
right? And be happy with that. I don't know how much Trails is selling these days. Is it even 600,000 copies? But like find that number, that sustainable number where it's not, it doesn't have to make a million bajillion dollars.
yeah,
But it makes enough that you can make the next game. And that's what Suikoden should be. And I think we all agree at this point we need more games like that and more series like that, right? That aren't just trying to be the next big 15 million
right.
unit seller that, funds whatever, like
Well,
huge stock dividends for
maybe we'll get a tie-in pachinko machine, and that'll really get the numbers in. I will
that
say
like
too.
that's honestly what I thought we would get from this stream was like a pachinko machine and like a sandwich like cameo at
Yeah,
Japanese McDonald's or something, right?
sure.
Oh, one of the announced things is Critical Role is doing a one shot uh like role playing
I totally missed that
episode.
one.
Yeah, in Suikoden, like in the Suikoden 2
Yeah,
setting. So like Matt Mercer, Day 9 is getting was it Day no, it was Ego Raptor, Aaron Hansen
yeah,
is gonna be there and they're playing Suikoden role playing game in like Dunen in the setting for
that is wild.
yeah, it's
I wonder what
insane.
they're
And,
using to
like
run it. I gotta find this out.
yeah, there's no last I checked there weren't details about what they were running, but it's like Matt Mercer doing it. And then I'm like, okay, wait, Matt Mercer? Like, is Konami working with Matt Mercer just on a one shot, or is he kind of involved in something larger?
Sure.
Um, with an anime coming.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. His involvement was really interesting to me because when he gets involved in stuff like Zelda, like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
He's not just taking on anything. And if Konami's willing to pay, Critical Role to do a one-shot RPG like live stream,
Yeah.
that's some serious money for a series if they're not really planning on going further than just these remasters.
Sure. I don't want to go too off track because I know we're going to talk about Suikoden plenty in the
Yeah,
show.
we can get
One
back
last
to
thing
that
I
for
did
sure.
want to touch on real quick was just a thought I had while seeing that announcement of the mobile game. I have to wonder if this is why remaster kind of got quietly delayed for a while. Because it sounded like it was on track for much earlier, and
Mhm.
suddenly we just stopped hearing about it at all. And now that it's about to release, they're like, oh, by the way, mobile game's coming out real soon. And so I wonder if they decided, hey, we need to make this mobile game. It's going to take this much time to get ready. We don't want the remaster coming out, 3 years before it.
Yeah.
We need these to be within a year of each other, or whatever. Like in a closer time scale than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, just a thought I had with it that I'm
Makes
curious.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, like, there were a lot of changes when they first announced and showed off a bunch of This Weekend in Remasters. Then it went dark for a long time,
yeah,
and then it came back. Like, there were a lot of graphical changes. There were a lot of like things that had been improved between the versions. So, they might all seen that as opportunity to just like cook a little bit more with these remasters. But that makes a lot of sense to try to like line up this announcement with the reveal or the release of the remasters. I mean, there's a reason that I'm announcing my book today,
yeah,
right? Same idea that I want to, get that message out there at the same time that people are thinking about and talking about this series, not 6 months from now, not, next year,
exactly.
uh right now, and that makes a ton of sense.
Cam, I think we're good. I think
Yeah.
we'll circle back to some of this later, but let's go ahead and get through the rest of our news.
Yeah. And just to be clear, rapid fire, new mobile game, manga based off the mobile game, anime based off Suikoden 2, and a Suikoden 1 stage play. That was all the news.
And line stickers.
And yeah. And so these are going to be some quick things. One, Monster Hunter Wilds is Capcom's fastest selling game ever, hitting 8 million sales in 3 days.
That's impressive.
Cool. And then Kamiya has shared on social media that he would still love to make Scalebound someday. And don't we all want you to do that, King? The Clover's Twitter page like shared a video of him showing some of his staff like old gameplay footage, and then he quote tweeted it saying like, "Let's do it, Phil. Hit me up." And I'm just like, "Yes,
Get Phil on the phone."
yes.
I feel like we've like missed the like train for games like that though. It's like too expensive to make Scalebound now. You know, like back when they first were announcing it, like I think we could have pulled it off. That game would cost so much money to make now and take like 9 years. Like how could it ever?
That is why he's hitting up.
How could it ever be profitable? And like, yeah, I don't know.
I believe in Kamiya. I believe in him.
Though I will say that's also
yeah.
definitely a commentary on like most AAA stuff right now. Where I'm like, I don't know how any of this is gonna be profitable. Like
nobody
you
does.
know, outside of Call of Duty, which they're not actually even going that
You know
all out
what?
on the AAA front, like compared to what we're seeing.
I'd love Kamiya to make a AA Scalebound. Like, give me that. That would be great. I've been playing Eternal Strands. We didn't really talk about what we've been playing. Been playing Eternal Strands, which is like a AA like action
I've been wanting to play
RPG.
that.
It's really great, and it's like, oh yeah, we just need more games like this, like that AA space. Kamiya, like, give me a AA Scalebound that runs on the Switch too.
Yeah.
See, I'm kind of like on the opposite mindset because I'm not gonna go super far into it, but I've played Split Fiction, and that is one of the best games I've played in years. It's that good. Like I think that GTA 6 pending, that is like almost a lock of like game of the year for me. Like, or that I could see winning game of the year at this point, and we're in March. That's how good it is. And I'm just like, yo, give Joseph Ferris fuck you money. Give Joseph Ferris like Naughty Dog budget money and let him cook.
Dude, man.
And I know that's irresponsible, but
like,
I
it'd be
still
cool.
want
Not
him.
nearly enough people would buy it, right? It's like the Kojima MGS5 situation where it's like Konami looked at the bill for that game and went, "Wait, we spent how much on making this? And what do we need to sell to make it happen? To like return?" I don't know.
But yeah, so that's the news for the week.
Yeah.
With it being a new month, which I did not do in February because I forgot, I'm going to go over the games that are coming out for March. We got Suikoden 1 and 2 HD Remaster on March 6th, my birthday, for PS5, Xbox, Switch, and PC. We got Rise of the Ronin for PC on March 11th. We got Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition on March 20th for Switch. We have Atelier Yumiya, The Alchemist of Memories and the Envisioned Land, March 21st on PS5, Xbox, Switch, and PC. We got Bleach Rebirth of Souls, March 21st on PS5, Xbox, Switch, and PC. We have the first Berserker, Kazan, March 27th on PS5, Xbox, and PC. And then we have AI Limit coming out March 27th on PS5 and PC. I'm going to quickly stop and talk about AI Limit. There's a demo on Steam, and I downloaded it today. And apparently it's like under like PlayStation's China Hero project. This game looks sick, and I want to play this game. And I've already tried to reach out to the right people to be like, yo, can we review this game? Because this looks really cool. And so, yeah, there's a demo on Steam. There might be a demo on PS5 because, I mean, there's one on Steam. Why would there not be one on PS5 with it being a PlayStation China Hero Project game? But I actually need to look into that. But yeah, that looks really cool. And I didn't really know about it. Like when I saw the trailer, I was like, this looks familiar. I feel like I've seen this before. But then completely did not remember any of it prior to that. And so nice little surprise.
What was that one like anime styled Souls like? It's giving me vibes of that a little bit.
Code Vein?
Yeah, Code Vein.
Mm.
That might be why it's like this seems kind of familiar a little bit, but it is definitely something new also. It looks cool. I didn't even know about this until you just talked about it right now. Like I just looked it up. I'm like, oh yeah, this might be neat. I don't know if it's gonna like make its way in my rotation right now because there's way too many things I'm catching up on, but I'm kind of down.
Yeah, it looks cool. But anyway, we're not gonna talk about what we've been playing this week because we haven't really been playing a whole lot, and that isn't a JRPG. That's a JRPG
I could talk
or
about
Eastern
Pirate
title.
Yakuza a third time. That's an option.
Except for Pirate Yakuza, which would be the third time.
I
So
am
we're
done
just
with
gonna
it
get
now,
into
though. At least so that ship has sailed now.
That's true. That's true. But it's topic of the showtime. We're here to talk with Aidan about his book, history of Suikoden, and just like I would love to know like just your history just in gaming as well. Just like how'd you get started into like playing games? Like what were some of the first ones you fell in love with? Like and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a real I still do. My dad was always really tech savvy, and so he was always interested in new technology. We always had new computers, Commodore 64 into like, DOS computers and laptops. So like I played Doom on a grayscale laptop way back in the day. With like the slowest LCD screen imaginable. So video games and computer games were always just part of my life. And even my mom, like she bought me a Game Boy because she wanted to play a Star Trek game. And so they were just something that was always around for me. I really liked my Game Boy, so I didn't have a Nintendo. I would just play my friends' Nintendos, but I had a Game Boy. And I loved games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Super Mario Land, Super Mario Land 2, a lot of action platformers and stuff. I played a lot of that. I played a lot of Tetris, the sort of the classic stuff. And then I remember going to like friend's cousin's house, and he also had a Game Boy, and I was like, oh man, like we should be friends. You have a Game Boy too. He was like, yeah, sure. You want? Let's swap. We'll play each other's games. And he handed me a Game Boy, and it had a copy of Final Fantasy Legend 2 in it. And so I started playing this, and I was like, "What the fuck? Like this? I'm not. No, this ain't it. This ain't it. I want my Ninja Turtles back." And so that was my first experience with like console style RPGs, like Final Fantasy style RPGs. Now, like uh, oh my gosh, what is his name? The guy who made the Saga games. He made so like Final Fantasy Legend 2 is like a Saga game in disguise. It was rebranded as Final Fantasy in the West. And it's late, and I'm blanking on the guy's name. But I love him dearly, but I don't think he makes good games. I like the way he
Kawazu.
experiments. Kawazu, there we go. I love the way Kawazu experiments. I don't even now really enjoy Kawazu games. And so as a first experience, like it was slow because it was a Game Boy RPG, but it was also Kawazu, so it was weird.
That's a
And I was like,
nightmare.
I don't like RPGs like that. They're not for me. But then fast forward a few years later, and I had a babysitter who would babysit me and my two younger brothers. And whenever they would go to bed, he and I would stay up playing video games. And it was usually Doom, Wolfenstein 3D, like the popular stuff back then. But one day he came over with a cartridge for the Super Nintendo. I had a Super Nintendo by that point. He was like, "Hey, we're gonna play this tonight," and it was Final Fantasy VI. So we started a new game of that, and I just sat there watching him play it, and I just remember like I was a big reader, really into like science fiction and fantasy novels at the time. Still am, but that was like what I was really into. And so I was watching this. I was like, this is like a book that I can play. Like this is a story that I'm part of, that I'm an active participant in.
My
And
mentality.
walking into that, like that first cave, like in Narsh as you're escaping, and you walk onto that save spot, and my babysitter, he saved the game. Was like, okay, like we saved our game. And I just felt this like wash of relief as we walked onto that shiny little bright light, and the screen washed blue, and there's a little jingle, and I was like, this is not like anything I've ever experienced before. Like I had no idea this type of game could exist. And so it sort of just rewired what I expected and thought of RPGs and what I expected of video games, period. And from that point on, that was the genre for me. Um, and so, me and my friends would play Final Fantasy VI, swap carts. Like, we had one cart and it kind of went around and did the rounds. But after finishing Final Fantasy VI myself, I was like, I need whatever comes next. Like, Final Fantasy VII is way off. I need whatever is coming next. And that led me to Chrono Trigger. And just like, I would look through magazines and be like, I need whatever is coming from the Final Fantasy team. So Chrono Trigger was coming next. And before it came out, I was like, this is my game. This is who I am. This is, this is now my personality. And so, I read every preview, every review, like all the strategy guides that were coming out. Came out in September. Finally got it for my birthday in December, and like from that point forward, that was like Final Fantasy VI sort of made me like, introduced me to Japanese RPGs and opened my eyes to them, and then Chrono Trigger really made me fall in love with that genre. And it remains my favorite game. Like it's still something that I adore and play constantly. And so from there, it was just sort of, like RPGs and video games were cool in my high school. Like it was just something, it wasn't like I talked to a lot of people after I wrote my first book, Fight Magic Items, and they say they read that and they're like, so it was like it was like talking to a friend that I didn't have in high school about these games that I loved, because for me, I couldn't talk about video games. It was something that, wasn't popular or set me apart. So meeting, hearing your experiences where you and your friends bonded over these was very unique. But that's just how it was for us. Like we traded RPGs, we talked about them, we were all excited about them. But even above, like through different grade levels, like we would trade and lend, RPGs to the older kids who would borrow, lend us their games, and that's how I would play Robo Trek or whatever, because somebody lent it to me for my copy of Legend of Dragoon, like 2 grades above me, and so it created this sort of like strong social circle of people who just loved video games, and that was just always it was just all, they were these single player games that brought us all together in the way that other people bonded over Street Fighter or Mario Kart or GoldenEye. To the point where, I would take I grew up gaming on a Commodore 1702 monitor, which I loved, but it was also fairly portable. So I would haul it and my PlayStation to a friend's house. We'd sort of put our TVs back to back and play through Lunar, Silver Star Story on PlayStation or Xenogears or whatever. And we'd have 2 copies of a game, and we would just sort of like spend the whole night playing our own versions of the game. And so RPGs to me were always something that were a bonding experience, something that was social, something that was, a way to get closer with friends. And my younger brother was really into them as well. And so that was something we bonded over. And they just always may remain important to me. I stepped back a little bit, didn't play as many games through sort of the 360 Wii era. I still gamed a lot, but there just weren't a lot of RPGs like really during that era. And I
Was
cover
it
it in my book. It's sort of a dark era, dark ages, except for the handhelds. And so that also came about at the same time that like my wife and I, we moved cities, away from our family, away from where we grew up, so she could go to school. And I had a Game Boy and a DS, and I just played so many RPGs on those handheld consoles. And so it really became something that I could then bring in my pocket with me. And, I would ride a lot of ferries, I'd ride a lot of buses, and I just always had those games with me. And so they became, like something that was just a companion later in life as well. And so when it came time to write this book, I wanted to channel a lot of that. This is sort of my first book, Fight Magic Items. Channel a lot of that feeling of what it was like to like be shaped by these games growing up. Why they're important to people like the three of us. Why are we here at 9 o'clock at night talking about RPGs? Right? Like, what is it about those that made such an impact on people's lives? And I think that is, the stories are about bringing people together and community, and how we all sort of lift each other up and help each other and make the world a better place. Their stories help me understand the larger world, like Suikoden's stories of war and conflict and the way that war touches all aspects of society helped me understand a lot of the wild stuff that was happening geopolitically in the world in the mid to late 90s. And I think that Suikoden's coming back at exactly the right time, because there's a lot of wild stuff happening in the world right now. And Suikoden's messages of, like everybody has a role in society, and war touches everybody in different ways, but everybody's important. Like that's really a valid part of what makes Suikoden relevant then and relevant now. And so, when it came time to write a second book, um, I got connected with the publisher at Boss Fight Books. He asked me to pitch a few different ideas, and so I did. I pitched a book on Lunar. I pitched a book on Xenogears. I think there was one other. I also pitched on Suikoden, and it stood out to me. And I knew that was going to be the book, because when I was writing Fight Magic Items, Suikoden was one of those games that I just felt like I could have written chapters and chapters and chapters about why it was important, not just to me, but why it was also unique within RPGs, and why its influence and its shape still has an impact today in like modern modern series like Trails, which I think is sort of the most close, like the closest modern series to Suikoden, and why we wouldn't have it as one of the more popular RPG series right now if it wasn't for Suikoden. And so the shape of the book just came together really easily for me as I was pitching ideas to Gabe. And at the time, I think the remasters had just been announced too. And so I was able to go to Gabe, and Boss Fight up until this book has only ever done one title per book. So if you don't know the Boss Fight books,
Yes. Yeah.
they're like a boutique publisher who publishes single volumes on specific video games. So they've published 35 different books. They have a book from Mike Drucker about Silent Hill 2, or Chris Kohler has written a book about Final Fantasy 5. They have Chrono Trigger, they cover Spelunky, they cover like a huge gamut. There's a Kingdom Hearts game, uh Kingdom Hearts book, Metal Gear Solid, all Parappa the Rapper, Untitled Goose Game. Like, they've covered all of these, and the authors will pick a game and then write a book. Some of them are really like heavily reported looks at Knights of the Old Republic that focuses like very heavily on interviews with the creators. Other ones are hyper personal, memoir style books about Metal Gear Solid from Ashley Birch and Anthony Birch, their brother and sister, and they go into so much of their brother sister dynamic growing up. And the book is as much about them as it is about Metal Gear Solid. And so, Gabe has this idea that like the best way for people to tell stories about video games is to tell stories about video games in the way that resonates most with them. And there's what, 35 of them or something now, and I've always admired them. I drew on them a lot when I was writing Fight Magic items, and so it was always a goal to be able to write one. And Suikoden just felt like such a good fit at this time for me and just for the world, as Suikoden's being reintroduced as a series. And the fact that the remasters were bundled together made so much sense to me, because I could never see writing about just Suikoden 1 or Suikoden 2 on their own. I think their story is so intertwined. And so my book is it's done. We're just in revisions now, and the first half of it looks at Suikoden 1, and it's very much focused on sort of the people who made the series. So Yoshitaka Moriyama, Junko Kawano, Miki Higashino, and who they are, why they made these games, what makes their experiences special, why drawing on something like Suikoden is based on a Chinese novel called The Water Margin, why that is so integral to what it does so well. And then the second half of the book takes a look at like how the series was growing, but also digs in more thematically with what it really wants to do in terms of like anti-imperialism, brotherhood, sort of community around like protagonists. And so, being able to tap into both games allowed me to give a really broad look at what the series, I think, does better than any other series out there.
So I don't want to go too off tangent, but I did want to mention that I'm also in the process of writing a book on Kingdom
Fabulous.
Hearts, and
Amazing.
I'm co-writing it with Alexa, who wrote the
Oh,
Boss
Get
Fight
Out.
book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Excellent. Oh, amazing.
yeah.
I did not know that.
So
That's
so
fabulous.
I was I'm super interested in in reading the book, especially once I play the first two games. I definitely want to check it out and see and I love learning more about games, especially like Japanese side of games. It's just I feel like that we just don't get, because we're on the Western side, and like also like Japanese people are more conservative. Like we don't really get to hear like
Yes.
those stories as much. And
Especially now. Yeah.
yeah, and I just like, because initially, again, not trying to make this about me. Initially, we wanted to pitch this book as a Nomura biography.
Okay.
But we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
There's so little public information
Yeah.
about that man.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where like that's just not possible right
Yeah.
now. And so maybe we can use this as an opportunity to be like, hey, Nomura, we can do this if you would let us. So but yeah, I'm very curious as to like, as a writer, for those that are listening that are writers too, or just like are curious about the process, like what is that process like for you, in the sense of writing a book, and like, because everyone kind of just has like a different process of like, just a different approach to writing a book. I know that my process is probably very different. So I'm just very curious as someone who's also writing a book right now that like I'm basically asking like, yo, what's the advice? What's the tips? Like, you know?
I mean, there's no right way to write a book.
Of course.
Is the big thing, right? When I wrote Fight Magic Items, I was on a very like hard deadline and very fast deadline. I wrote it in about
Mm,
I wrote it in about 3 months. And it's like
wow.
100 and the first draft was 120,000 words or something. And I think I got it down to 110, something like that. So it was very, very fast writing, which was hard in its own way, but also kept me focused and also, set sort of limitations that define the shape of the book. Um, for me, it involves a lot of I outline heavily, which helps me a lot, especially when I have tight deadlines. And so for both books, I outlined and I sit down and I think about what sort of shape I want the book to take. And so, with Fight Magic Items, I outlined and I brainstormed a lot, and it was hard to find a shape that didn't just feel like a random assortment of like chapters that kind of fell semi chronologically. And so through conversations with my agent, my editor, I eventually decided that what I needed to do was focus not just on Japanese RPGs, but the book is the history of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and the rise of Japanese RPGs in the West. And so I took the shape of the book, the outline for the book. I had already written a bunch about Yuji Horii, who created Dragon Quest, Hironobu Sakaguchi, who created Final Fantasy. And I needed to make sure that every chapter in some way either tied back to Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, uh, and the way these new games or the industry was shaped by those two games, or the way they sort of pushed against what Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest were doing, but in some way, like communicate with Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. So that meant I had to leave a lot of content and stories out of the book that I really wanted to write about. But that was, ultimately something that focusing on a through line allowed me to complete it when it needed to be completed by, but also gave a shape and an overall like, thrust to the narrative that was important for the book. It's one of those things where the history of Japanese RPGs is so big that I could never write a book that included everything as much as I would want to. And so I put myself sort of in the center of the story as a proxy for the player. And I wanted to tell the story of, Japanese RPGs and the people who make them and the people who play them. And so at the beginning of the book, I said, this narrative is shaped by my experience, my personal experience going through here. So there I am, I'm going to touch on the games that were important to me or that I experienced during these times of my life or during these times of the industry. I won't get to games that were important to you, but that's okay because it's about sort of the emotional experience and the emotional journey that we all went through and that the creators went through. And so understanding that sort of those limitations were okay, that they helped make the book better, didn't take away from the book, allowed me then to, outline and find a shape that I was happy with, my editor was happy with as well. But what, like you bring up a really good point that Japanese creators are very difficult to get a hold of and nail down for any sort of information. I tried for about 18 months through multiple like points of contact, multiple PR contacts, many emails to get an interview with the creators of Suikoden before Yoshitaka Murayama passed away. After he passed away, through the Ayuden Chronicle team, through the Suikoden team, and just like despite being a games journalist with a lot of bylines, writing this book, I just couldn't do it. No, like nobody would bite. People would be like, "Oh, let me check in with the team," and then he'd come back and be like, "Sorry, I can't accommodate that." And so, like, getting that sort of level of like bespoke reported um, information, if you're not backed by Wired or Polygon or The Verge, like they'll make time and the PR, it's not Junko Kawano and it's not the people who actually do this that are like, no, I don't want to do that interview. It's that you have to go through PR. And Japanese creators, especially right now, are so locked down that if they don't see like marketing opportunity, they're probably not going to give you the time of day. And that's a really hard reality, and that was something that came up big time in Fight Magic Items as well. As I knew I would not be able to access these creators now, but what I did have access to is a huge wealth of interviews that that were conducted in the 80s and 90s, because these people love what they do and they love to talk about what they do. And like roundtable interviews and like off the cuff interviews exist from the 80s and 90s, and they're so rich and detailed and fascinating. And it's like, it's such a shame that we don't get that anymore. Because, you know, as Fight Magic items went on, one common criticism is the beginning of the book is so focused on people and who they are and why they're doing things. And then as you get through the second half of the book, it becomes more like, this is what was happening in the industry, or here's, you know, some reflections on what I thought of Xenoblade Chronicles and Operation Rainfall. And that's because the data just doesn't exist. Like, I cannot go and talk to Tetsuya Takahashi about Xenoblade Chronicles or Xenosaga or Xenogears. Like, that data just doesn't exist. And so recognizing exactly what you're doing, recognizing that, like, if you can't get to Nomura, how do you find that angle to tell a story that brings forward the compelling aspects that inspired you to want to write the story in the first place, right? And so a book on Kingdom Hearts as sort of an analog to say, like, you know, this is what Kingdom Hearts tells us about its creator, I think I find it very fascinating, because I think so much of us is reflected in our work. But we also hide a lot of ourselves from our work. And so, you know, like, how do you do that? How do you tell a full story about somebody without access to them? It's something I haven't cracked yet. But for Suikoden, I learned a lot from Fight Magic items. And it's a book where, you know, I tapped into a lot of people who are longtime fans of the series to provide experience outside of mine, tapped into a lot of those legacy interviews that exist online as well. And then I was able to contact and get in touch with people who, you know, were involved in the Western releases. So I have a whole chapter that digs into very specifically Suikoden II's localization, and how and why a localization headed up by Jeremy Blaustein, who is sort of a legendary localizer from the 90s and further on. Like, he single-handedly localized Metal Gear Solid for the West. And then a year later, he did Suikoden II. So how did a localization headed up by somebody like Blaustein end up being notoriously bad when he is one of the most talented localizers in the world? So you go and look for the stories that you do have access to, the things that you can bring forward and say, this story's never been told before. How can I dig into it? And how can I reach out to the people who could help me tell it the best way that I can? Sometimes that person's you, right? Sometimes that experience that you have with those games, or that perspective that you have with those games, is the best way to tell that story. And sometimes it's reaching out to other people. And so finding that balance really helps. So to go back to the very beginning of the question, I outline heavily. I do a lot of reading. I read a lot of interviews. I read a lot of reviews. I read a lot of, you know, modern contextual stuff to find out what do we think of Suikoden now, but also go back and, like, what did people think of Suikoden in 1996? What were they saying in 1997? What were the creators saying at that time? What were critics saying at that time? And really just try to, like, immerse myself in as much content as I can, and then the kind of writing starts from there. And every book's a little different in terms of how it comes together. Fight Magic Items was I wrote the first bit for the pitch document, but then it was very, like, I'd be writing parts of chapter 8, and then the next day parts of chapter 22. And, like, as information kind of came through, I would sort of be piecemeal putting things together as my brain sort of dissociated from, you know, the story I was trying to tell. Suikoden was a little bit more linear. So it's, you know, like, every book is different. There's no right way to write a book.
It's very insightful. I am figuring things out myself as I go along, and yeah, it really depends on the person, and, like, and the writer, and, like, because, like, I was just like, I cannot do, I would not feel comfortable to write my own book by myself,
Yeah.
like, on my first try, like, having
Yeah.
Alexa there, like, to, like,
Yeah.
you know, bounce off of it. Just,
Mhm.
like, it makes things easier, so that in the future, like, maybe I can write a book just by myself,
Yeah.
and maybe I I will be able to do that. I don't know, but
And I mean,
there's
like, for context too, like, the Suikoden book is like a third the length of Fight Magic Items, and it's taken me 3 times as long to write and
yeah.
revise. You know,
Hmm.
so there's just, like, even once you've done it, it doesn't necessarily get, you know, yeah, every book is its own challenge too, right? And but you take that experience, you take the confidence that you get from this experience with Alexa, and like you will go in there, you'll try to write that next book, you'll be like, I don't know what I'm doing, but then you'll have 10,000 words. You're like, hey, okay, I know what the next 10,000 words need to be. And you kind of build off that. And the best thing you can do is have creative partners, whether they're professionals, like if you, if and when you have an agent or an editor and you work with them, but even like having strong creative partners like Alexa that can guide you through that, like that's getting your work out there and writing it. I always say that the first draft is for telling yourself the story and revisions are for telling your readers. And so don't be afraid.
Interesting.
Just get that first draft out there.
Yeah.
Everybody's first draft sucks. Like you should
Mhm.
see the red ink on my revisions for this book. But the first draft, if it doesn't exist, you can't fix it. And
Mhm.
so like, even like, I didn't feel confident writing Fight Magic Items or this Suikoden book. But once that first draft came through and I went, yeah, this is really flawed, but I think I can fix it. And then that's where, to me, the real magic starts to happen is in revisions. And accepting that it's fine to write a bad first draft was really like a freeing experience for me.
Yeah. I actually heard a phrase very recently on another podcast. I think it was write sober, edit, or no, sorry,
Yeah.
write drunk, edit sober, where it's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
idea
Yeah.
of like, just get it out. Like you just need to
Yeah. Yeah.
get the thing on the paper, get all your thoughts and feelings. Just don't have it filtered. Don't think about it that hard. You just need to get it on there. And then it's the revision process. It's the editing. It's the going over it time and time again is where you really get that refined thought. Similar to what you said with the idea of like first drafts for you, the actual edited version is for the reader.
Yeah, exactly. That's a pretty famous quote, and I do think it's like the more afraid you are of a first draft, the harder it gets. And
Yeah.
so, I used to be the type of writer who wanted a perfect first draft, and so I would agonize and I would re-edit sentences before I moved on to the next one. And now I don't even know how I overcame that. I guess running a blog for 7 years where I was just like constantly churning out content
Mhm.
and didn't necessarily have time to like sit on stuff helped me understand that like, I just need to write and then everything can be fixed later. And that's okay. Like that's
I
not a
r-
failure. Like,
I really need to learn this mentality too, because
yeah.
we were
Yeah.
doing our Q&A yesterday, and I was talking to him about like how I'm a bit of a perfectionist,
Mhm.
and I just like I write my stuff, and I'm just like, this fucking sucks. Like
Yeah.
I just write. I'll like I'll write a chapter about like this character that means so much to me, and I'm like throwing my heart out on the page, and I'm like, this is garbage. I'm like, I'm so bad,
Yeah. It's okay.
but
But yeah, that's
but
what
Everybody's
yeah.
editors
bad
are
at
for,
first. Like, yeah.
So how long was the process of like writing the book, and
Yeah.
like what like how long did you get to write the book, and like how long is it gonna take for it to like come out from
Yeah.
some like submitting it?
Yeah. So like I said, Fight Magic Items was on a really tight timeline and I don't
Mm-hmm.
recommend that. We were sort of
Mm-hmm.
aiming to get it out for Final Fantasy VII's 25th anniversary. So there's
Oh,
sort
okay.
of like some promotional aspects to that. But I also like deadlines. They help me
Mm-hmm.
focus and keep me motivated. This boss fight book took me longer to write. I think the actual drafting was maybe a similar in length of
Mm-hmm.
time, but again, it's like 40,000 words instead of
Mm-hmm.
120,000 words. So it's like one third the length. But it probably took me about 3 months of drafting to write. Then I sent that off to my editor at Boss Fight and got revisions back. This was also though at a time when my youngest daughter was starting kindergarten for the first time. There was a lot of stuff going on at day job. There was the pandemic stuff and just like the world changing. So like my revisions, I got them back, and the editor, Elise, who looked at the book, had so much brilliant stuff that like we're coming back to sort of self-confidence as well, that like I looked at those and I was like, she is so right about so many things. And she had tons of positive stuff to say, but at times I just didn't feel like I was mentally capable of doing the best that I could with the advice and the feedback that she gave me. And so I would edit a little bit here and there, and then I'd hit more challenging bit of feedback, and I'd be like, okay, like I know that she's right, I know what I need to do, but the amount of effort and energy that to get in there is going to be really hard. And so, sometimes I'd pick away at edits and I'd be like, I'm not doing my best here. Like, I'm not thriving within these edits. And so it was making sure that I, found the right time to get back to those. And I was fortunate with Boss Fight, I didn't have a deadline, which in some ways helped and, give me space when I needed it. And in some ways, like did make the process take longer. But that was okay because once I kind of got through that and got settled in, new routines, I went back to the book and I was like, oh, now this all makes sense. And as soon as I sat down and started revising, it just started flowing. And the process has been easy and gratifying. And the book is so much stronger for Elise's work and the work that I've put into it since. And I feel really proud of that work. And I can recognize now, like, last summer wasn't the right time to hit these revisions. But this winter and this spring has felt so invigorating to finish this book. And that led to, again, like the book getting revised and finished and Gabe and I being like, okay, like we can hit this deadline to announce it on the release of the remasters. Like, let's go. And so it's felt, like sometimes you just need a little bit of time away too. And maybe that's me. Maybe some people benefit from diving right in, but sometimes I need to like create something imperfect and then let it sit for a while. And then I can come back and have a little bit of perspective. Very like precious sometimes. So, like being told to fix stuff at first can feel really hard.
Yeah.
Even though even though on the flip side, I'm saying, hey, write bad first drafts. It's okay if they're bad. Sometimes I need time to process feedback and just, it doesn't even happen in the front of my head. Sometimes it happens in the back of my head as I'm doing other things. And so knowing and recognizing like when is the right time or how much time you need to work through something can be a valuable trait that has taken me a long time to learn, to like really understand about myself.
Awesome. Well, looks like we're gonna wrap things up here. We know that you have to, you have to hop out soon, and but we appreciate your time. This has been super insightful, very educative. Like, that's like the thing about this podcast is that like, obviously, I want people that are JRPG fans to experience this podcast, but I also want to like, I also like it to serve as like an education piece, like teach people about things because like JRPGs is like it's seen as such a like niche genre, but there's like so much to it that like every day like it feels like every day I'll just like learn about like this. Oh yeah, this JRPG was like it's super prominent and like, but it was like 20 years ago, and a time when like the localization wasn't, like JRPGs localization has always been a big thing, and it's just like, oh wow, like, and I always get so like kind of in like pumped, like, oh yes, another JRPG that I can dig into in the future and learn about, and that's like what I really like about this podcast with me and Kev, just chopping it up and learning more about just the genre and things that and like how these games are made and the creatives behind it, because it just like kind of like what we said earlier, it's just like it feels like such a giant question mark a lot of the times, especially nowadays. And so like making books like this and getting to like talk to people who are like passionate about certain games just like makes me even more inclined and inspired, encouraged to play those games. So I really am excited for the book. I can't wait to check out just the series in general. And I appreciate you for coming on and talking with us.
Thanks. Do check out the other boss fight books. I learned more about writing about video games from boss fight books than anywhere else, like in aggregate. There's so many different ways of talking about video games, from the way that like Chris Kohler integrates his own personal experiences into like game histories, and how he kind of defined for me like the idea of like a game history as a memoir and the narrator, the writer, as like a proxy for the player. But then you look at Sebastian Decken has a book on Final Fantasy VI, and he's a trained opera singer. And so he has this incredible background in classical music. And so he looks at Final Fantasy VI just through the lens of Nobuo Uematsu's score. And so the whole book is about the music in Final Fantasy VI. And it taught me so much about so much about a game that I thought I knew everything about. I thought I knew Final Fantasy VI, like, you know, to the deepest level. And then I read Sebastian's book and I was like, there was so much here that I just did not understand. And so you have these perspectives of people who go in and say, this is what games writing is to me. This is what my book about this game needs to be. And that taught me so much just by reading those, and recognizing that, again, there's no right way to write a book. And so, I appreciate you having me on and letting me talk about writing. I'm going to hopefully do more podcasts about the Suikoden book. And we're going to talk about Suikoden and why it's cool and why it's important. But I don't often get to talk about craft. That's the behind the scenes, how the sausage is made stuff that a lot of people avoid. But one thing that I found when I got into games journalism like 5 years ago is there was no information on pitching articles. How do I write a feature length article? How do I edit it? Like, what's it like working with an editor? And so I put a lot of time and continue to try to be as transparent as I can and share my experiences. And they're not going to match up with everybody's experiences, but the more we all talk about these things, the more the person who's like, I want to do this thing, but I just don't even know where to start, doesn't feel as alone or in the dark about how it all works. So getting to talk about this, like writing craft stuff, it's great. It's fabulous.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Let the people know where. Well, first off, you can buy Fight Magic items
Yeah.
on like most major retailers, right? Amazon.
Yeah,
Is there
everywhere you can
anywhere?
buy books. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and yeah, go online, any of your online retailers. You can go into your like mom and pop bookstore in your town, and they can order it in if they don't have it on the shelves as well. So like anywhere you can buy books, you can get Fight Magic items. Came out again 2022, so it's coming up on 3 years old, which is bananas to me.
What is time?
But so it is. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's out there and it's still, still selling copies, got that long tail going. And it's always a pleasure to meet, like you mentioned at the very beginning, how I reached out to you guys about being on this podcast. And, I'm doing it because I have a duty to spread the word about my new book, but I also just love meeting other people who love these games as much as I do. And that's like really why I wanted to be on this. I saw you guys launch a podcast. I've been keeping up and I'm like, I just want to talk to those guys, and so like continuing to like do what you do and just inspire other people to think about video games and RPGs is really important to me. So I appreciate you making time for me and having me on and doing what you're doing. And I can't wait to see how you guys take this forward and what else you guys kind of start exploring with the podcast. It's excellent.
Appreciate that very much.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate that. And we would love to have you on again and just like, just be able to talk about games in general and
Yeah.
so we have more to talk about there as well. And then where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on Blue Sky at Aidan is Fun. So that's AIDANIS.FUN. Aidan is Fun. I'm on Blue Sky like far too much, so you can always find me posting nonsense. I also post a lot of pictures of my CRT TVs, so I take pretty pictures of video games, and post them on there. The best place to find out more about like my books and what I'm up to, and also read a lot of my writing because I write about video games a lot, is at my newsletter Astrolabe. So it's astrolabe.aidanmoher.com. I'm sure you guys will kind of put that in the show notes. I write there regularly, features about video games, about books. I write about writing. I also post a lot of news about what's going on with me and my books. I've got a big, piece up there today about the announcement of the new Suikoden book. I made this fun little mock-up gaming ad. So like it's made in the style of a 90s video game magazine for the new book, which I've posted on my newsletter, and it's a good place to see that as well.
Because we haven't seen it yet, and because I'm curious,
Yeah.
because I think that boss fight does a really cool thing with its covers.
Yeah.
What is the item
I
or the thing
yeah,
that's on the
yeah,
cover?
we haven't done the cover yet. So on my
Oh,
ad, it's just a big question mark.
okay.
Because
Well,
that was like, that was a
yeah.
problem that I needed to solve because we don't have a cover yet.
Okay.
And we'll do a cover reveal closer to the release date and stuff. But yeah, I was like, I do have a mock-up of the book, but I was like, wait a sec, I don't know what the cover is, but I also don't want it to look like the real cover because I don't want to back Gabe into like having to use whatever I chose. But I'm curious to see what we end up using for it. Because so if you don't know or you're not familiar with boss fight books, they all have sort of the same cover for every book, a cover layout. It's white background, And it always features like an item or a thing or some sort of like layout of various different things. So Parappa the Rapper had like an onion and some other things like based on the masters. Um, Chrono Trigger has a hedgehog that's sort of like laid out to look like Lavos, which is incredible to me.
I love that kind of art.
I think Metal Gear Solid had a cardboard box. And
Yeah,
so
the
it always
cardboard
picks
box.
like an item that ties into the game somehow. So I'm excited to like, start talking with Gabe and the crew at Boss Fight to start brainstorming what we might look at. I would do a deep cut like I think Nanami, who's one of the characters in Suikoden II, during one of her combo attacks, she takes a break and has lunch while her brother does all the fighting. And I think she's like eating onigiri or like sushi or something at that
Yeah.
point. So it'd be funny to do like a super deep cut with like onigiri on the cover, something like that. But in this case, in this ad, I have a mock up of the book, but it just has a big old question mark.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. I'll
'Cause,
send you
yeah,
guys a link when we're offline. But
okay,
everybody
okay.
listening right now can go to astrolabe.aidanmoher.com and see what I'm talking about.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Aiden, for joining us. Kevin, is there any last thing you want to say before we dip out of here?
No, I think we're good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you can follow me at Cam Final Mix on your social media platform of choice. You can follow Kevin at Kevin Kenson. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
Later.